Well, Andy says hi, and so do I. And it's time for 2 Corinthians chapter 11. 2 more chapters after this, and I think I'll do those in one 30-minute session, but this chapter I'm going to keep separate. It'll be less than 30 minutes, but it'll be long enough. And have I ever mentioned context is so important? Remember in the last chapter how Paul was actually boasting? Well, you could hear the frustration about the people who were putting him down. I mean, his frustration. And some of them were even lying about what he had done or that they claimed he had not done, whatever. Well, yeah, this chapter is going to continue. And Paul is going to let loose with both barrels of a 10-gauge shotgun. If you don't know shotguns, that's one of the big barrels. I mean, he's going to blast them. Verses 1 through 4, Paul says, I hope you will allow me to be foolish just a little more. Please put up with me. I am jealous for you with the jealousy of God. I promised you to be a pure bride to our husband, Christ. However, I am afraid that somehow, just as Eve was deceived by the serpent's cunning words, that you might be similarly led away from your sincere, pure devotion to Christ. Wow. And Paul's going to continue trying to get the Corinthians to see the truth, to remember what he had done and why they needed to reorganize the lies of his detractors. Well, verses 5 through 11. It's just a warm-up to what's coming next. 5 through 11, Paul says, I don't actually believe I am inferior to those super apostles. No, I was never trained to be a great speaker, but I do have knowledge. Hey, stop. That's me. I was never trained to be a great speaker, but I do have knowledge. I mean, I've been studying the Bible for 50 years. And I mean studying it, not just casually reading it once in a while. All right, let's go back. Verses 5 through 11. I don't actually believe I am inferior to those super apostles. No, I was never trained to be a great speaker, but I do have knowledge. We have made this obvious to you many times. Was I wrong when I humbly shared the gospel message of God to you at no charge? I actually robbed other churches by accepting their support so that I could serve you. Plus, when I lived among you and needed something, I never asked anyone for help. The brothers that came from Macedonia supplied everything I needed. I did not allow myself to be a burden to you in any manner, and that is how I will continue to minister to you. As surely as the truth of Christ lives in me, nobody in Greece can stop my boasting about this. And why is that? Because God knows that I love you. Thank you, Paul. I don't know where I want to start. I mean, Paul's being very, very transparent here. He says, I was never trained to be a great speaker. He says that he does not believe he is inferior to those so-called super apostles. Can you hear the sarcasm ringing, shouting, blasting? He reminds them that he had simply shared the gospel message without asking them for money. You know, it's amazing how much emphasis Christians put on money. Yes, my sarcasm is showing. If a minister or missionary asks for money, Christians complain, all they want is money. I don't go to that church because all they do is take up offering, this offering, that offering. They got 4 offerings in the same service sometime. Probably exaggerating. I've been in a church where they did 2 offerings, one for the church and one for a guest speaker. And maybe a third. I think they did one time 3 offerings because they had a special musician plus a guest speaker. Anyway, if a minister or missionary doesn't ask for support, people get upset over that. The old damned if you do and damned if you don't. Preachers get stuck in that position a lot. Don't let you be the one sticking them in that position. Support them. Support them. That's what they need. They need people in the congregation that are on their side. But Velcro, I don't always agree with them. So what? So what? Support them. Unless they're doctrinally wrong, and then leave the church. Don't make a big scene about it. Go back to 1 Corinthians 3:16. The whole chapter, 1 Corinthians 3, is about the church, building up the church. Verse 16 says, don't tear it down. It's often misquoted to say don't smoke cigarettes or whatever. That's not what it says. Read the whole chapter. And I promise you in the Greek, your body is the temple. That's plural. Your bodies are the temple. Don't tear down a church. Support the pastor, even if you don't always agree. That'll work for you. And as usual, I don't practice what I preach. I preach what I've already practiced. There was a church where the pastor and I disagreed over something. And he told me to cut back on my ministry. I was doing too much in his opinion. I think he felt threatened. I didn't want his job. I was just trying to support him. But he got upset. I left the church. And for 6 months, Janet and I had people asking, where are you going to church? We'd like to go with you. And we didn't pick a church. We just church hopped until people stopped asking. I'm not here to tear down another church, to steal people from that church. I am not. That church was not a horrible place. You know, he had a problem. He felt threatened. I let him win. People, that's what we all need to do. Support pastors, even if it's really rough. And if you can't, then leave without tearing down that church, please. Unless they're totally doctrinally wrong. If they are not following Scripture, and I don't mean they don't preach the whole gospel. I mean, if they're preaching something that's wrong. Anyway, verses 12 to 15. So I will continue doing what I have always done in order to undercut those who want to boast that their work is equal to our work. They are false apostles, deceitful workers who masquerade as Christians. That is no surprise, since we already know that Satan masquerades as an angel of light. So it should not surprise anyone when his servants masquerade as servants of righteousness. They will receive their eternal destination based on their works. Okay, Paul is speaking straight in your face truth. The self-proclaimed apostles are simply trying to take credit for Paul's work, and he says they aren't even Christians. And they're probably there when Paul wrote this letter. Think about that. However, Paul does not ask for revenge. He doesn't say, okay, Corinthians, you got to kick these people out of the church. No, he doesn't do that. He allows God to give them their eternal punishment. You know, it is amazing how often God resolves wrongdoing. More than once, men posing as ministers have wronged a man, I know, without any action from him, without him saying anything about what they'd done, except to me. They lost their ministry. They each lost their ministry. One was voted out of the church he pastored. A couple years later, If you're patient, God works it out. The other saw his church go from close to 200 people to a handful that today meet in his living room 10 years later. Trusting God. Trusting God. Paul did. He wasn't out for revenge. He didn't say, go get him. I will say, verse 16 to 20, Paul says, I will say it again. No one should think I'm a fool. If you think that, then tolerate me like you would any foolish person. That will allow me to do a little more boasting. They have claimed my self-confident boasting is not from the Lord. That thought is foolish. But since that is how many people look at things, I'll go ahead and boast the same way everyone else does. You think you are wise and you gladly put up with fools? In fact, you even put up with people that take everything they can from you and take all sorts of advantages over you and claim their authority over you and even slap your faces. Well, Paul uses some more sarcasm, strong sarcasm. A lot of sarcasm in 2 Corinthians. Don't feel bad. Jesus used sarcasm too. We can get to that. We're going to do the Gospel of Mark Sunday morning, a few weeks. But, sarcasm sometimes can make a good point. Overusing it, not good. Hi, my name is Velcro, and I have a problem with overusing sarcasm. I need a 12-step program for that. Yeah. He is continuing to build on this entire line by making it clear that he thinks that Corinthians are being fooled, that they are becoming fools. He points out that they are being taken advantage of. Now, no doubt he is hoping that when confronted with the truth, they would see it clearly. It might happen. But as they say, you ain't seen nothing yet. Paul is about to do some boasting that no one can match, and I told you this was coming. 21 through 29, Paul says, I must admit that I am ashamed of being too weak for that. The confrontation. Really, Paul? I must admit that I am ashamed of being too weak for that. Whatever someone else dares to boast about, here I go, speaking like a fool. I can boast about whatever they boast about. They boast about being Hebrews. I'm a Hebrew. They boast about being Israelites. I'm an Israelite. They boast about being children of Abraham. I'm a child of Abraham. They boast about being servants of Christ. This is crazy how I'm talking. I'm even more of a servant of Christ. After all, I've worked significantly harder and been in prison more often, been whipped more harshly and been exposed to death repeatedly. 5 times the Jews whipped my back 39 times. 3 times I was beaten with rods. I was stoned 1 time and shipwrecked 3 times. I even spent 1 night and the following day in the open sea. I have traveled constantly and faced danger from river crossings and bandits and my fellow Jews and Gentiles too. I have been in danger in cities and in the country and while on ships and in danger from false believers. I have worked hard, quite hard, and often gone without sleep. I have known hunger and thirst, even going without food. I've been cold and even naked. Beyond all of that, I never forget the burden I have because of my care for all of the churches. I share the weakness of others, and if they are led away from Christ, my heart is broken. Wow. I made a little chart here. What the posers claim, Hebrews, Israelites, children of Abraham, servants of Christ. What Paul compares that to, same thing, Hebrew, Israelite, child of Abraham, servant of Christ. And then the posers had nothing else to say. But Paul, his list goes on and on. Prison more often, whipped more harshly, left for dead more often, whipped 39 times, 5 times, beaten with rods 3 times, Stoned and left for dead once, shipwrecked 3 times. Kind of indicates he traveled more. Spent 1 day and night drifting on the sea, dealt with dangerous river crossings, faced bandits, faced danger in the cities, country, on ships, faced danger from false believers. You know, I've often said Christians are some of my worst enemies to my ministry because they don't understand what I do. He says he worked so hard he had no time to sleep, went hungry and thirsty, and been cold and even left naked. But more important than all of that was Paul's almost unbearable burden he felt in sharing the gospel. Did you hear that? The last verse there, verse 29, Paul says, I share the weakness of others, and if they are led away from Christ, my heart is broken. That's where his heart was. Verses 30 to 33. So if I have to boast, I will boast about everything that demonstrates my weaknesses. God, the Father of our Lord Jesus, is worthy of all praise forever, and he knows that I'm not lying to you. King Aretas of Damascus, the governor, sent the city guards to arrest me. To escape, I was lowered in a basket from a window in the city wall. Paul said that mostly he would boast about his weaknesses. He praised God and Jesus, and then he reminded them of a story they'd probably heard before. You can find it in the book of Acts. When I didn't look up the reference, but it's like chapter 12, something in that area. When he was lowered from a window in the city wall, in order to escape arrest, it was early after he became a Christian, went out in the wilderness. God taught him. He came back and started preaching, and he faced some problems. All right. Yeah, I told you this is going to be a somewhat short lesson. I'm going to stop there. Read ahead, 2 Corinthians 12. Paul's going to focus in on his weakness, his biggest weakness. You probably call it the thorn in the flesh. We'll talk next time.